The Generation 9 Pokemon games are awful, no doubt. Many people have pointed out the various bugs and visual glitches, as well as the terrible graphics and poor performance of these games. But what if I told you that those issues are not even the main problems? I played all the way through Pokemon Scarlet without really encountering any visual bugs, or glitches, or any noticeably painful performance problems, and yet I was still left in complete disappointment. So what is it about these games that left me in such speechless awe at how awful they are? Everything. From the open world, the story, the content or lack thereof, to the gameplay, the multiplayer, and awful gimmick of this generation. Every single aspect is tarnished with laziness, and I'm going to comb through each of these elements and show you just how embarrassingly shallow these games are. Let's begin with what you will be exploring and seeing for the majority of your playtime in this game. The open world. Ever since their move to the 3D era, Game Freak have struggled tremendously to create immersive 3D open world environments. The wild area in Sword and Shield is a perfect example of this. It was essentially just an area where Pokemon spawned and the Dynamax gimmick resided, and lacked any depth in gameplay mechanics, lore, or exploration beyond that. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's open world is essentially one gigantic wild area, with even less mechanics and lore. You could at the very least say that Sword and Shield's wild area had a mechanic, with the whole berry tree shaking. In Scarlet and Violet, there's quite literally zero other mechanics outside of the boring respawning Pokeballs and sparkles on the floor. Do any of you remember when we had fleshed out open worlds? Remember secret bases? Remember berry farms? Remember the underground? Remember HM puzzles? Remember NPC quests? Remember fishing? Remember location-specific mechanics? There is none of that here, except for the 4 copy-pasted legendary puzzles, where you have to find a coloured stake somewhere in the wild, and when you have all of them, go to the shrine, rinse and repeat 4 times. There is nothing to do that is interesting in this open world. Remember secret locations off the beaten path? They're gone too. Replaced with towers. They might have a Pokeball on them and a mimic Pokemon, but that's it. There's no haunted mansion, there's no ruins of Alph, there's no Kanto power plant, no turnback cave, nothing. Just towers. In fact, in most towns, you can't go inside almost all of the buildings. Exploration is probably one of the cornerstones of what made the Pokemon games so incredible in the first place. And to see absolutely no effort made to accommodate for this in the form of interesting locations and points of interest to explore is tragic, to say the least. Imagine a super flat world in Minecraft, but you can't dig, cut down trees, make farmland, or build. All you can do is kill things and trade with villagers. That's Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's open world. Barren and lifeless. Don't be fooled by the various icons that show up on your map right at the beginning of the game. They are quite literally there to distract you as much as possible from the shallow nature of these games. The content that is here is completely lacking in any sort of challenge or depth. Once you finish the 5 boss battles that unlock new upgrades to your glorified dog, the 8 gym leaders, Elite Four and the Champion, and the 5 team star bosses, that is it! I cannot bring myself to consider what occurs after the main bulk of the game, end game content. Every objective marker is basically a boss fight. There's no Pokemon contests, there's no location-specific content, there's no battle tower, there is nothing else after this, unless you plan to train your team to be the best that they can be stats-wise. There is absolutely nothing to work towards after the main game is completed. Remember in Heart Gold and Soul Silver when you finished the main game, and then the end game content was Kanto? A whole other region? Remember how secret bases in Alpha Sapphire and Omega Ruby provided some reason to replay the game? Well, Scarlet and Violet provides nothing. There's no extra activities for you to participate in. Once the main bulk of the game is finished, you may as well throw it away, because trust me, after it's finished, the only thing left you have is this. The endgame content is a boss battle. I refuse to acknowledge this as anything other than a boss battle. If you strip away the fact that the endgame content is basically just a conclusion to Arven's story, all it is a boss battle. You quite literally don't do anything outside of this. Area 0 is just a glorified stroll through a set-piece location with a boss fight at the end, and a chance to catch the box art legendary again. There's no evil team trying to prevent you from stopping this time machine. There's no puzzle to overcome in order to get there. You just walk through all the checkpoints, read some text, and then fight the professor. That's all. You can participate in the Ace Academy tournament, but this is essentially a barely cobbled together replacement of the Battle Tower that you can outscale because it doesn't limit your Pokemon level, so it's never a fair fight. What is the point? The endgame content is basically an excuse to tie up all the loose ends of what happens in the main portion of the game. It would all last roughly 10 minutes if the text boxes and cinematics didn't slow you down. I didn't come to watch a movie, I came to play a game. I get Pokemon isn't necessarily known for its gameplay, but at least you could say there was gameplay mechanics and content in the previous games. Scarlet and Violet feels like the most bare bones experience of Pokemon you could get. Even the first game in the series is better than this. Even Sword and Shield is better than this. And this isn't even considering the story. So you're basically a student at this academy and they're holding their annual treasure hunt thing. You basically go out and find your treasure, and this is the crux of why you go out and have an adventure. You get introduced to 3 story paths, each with their own featured characters. The Team Star path features Team Star, Mr. Clavel, who pretends he's someone called Clive, and Penny, who is secretly the Team Star leader but acts as an errand girl for the leader. This path's story revolves around you beating all of the Team Star leaders, who were students at the academy but chose to rebel because they were being bullied. Each boss has their own contribution to the team, like Giacomo being the one who made Team Star's battle music, Mela being responsible for getting the Starmobiles powered up, the boss Pokemon that they all ride, and Eri being the one who trained all the other bosses how to battle. While I thought they were a unique take on the evil teams in Pokemon, their implementation and effect on the overarching story of the game is minimal. Compared to the likes of Team Galactic's Cyrus and Team Plasma's Jetsis, Team Star is pretty forgettable once you finish their story, and the plot twists that Penny is the boss and that Clive is in fact the head principal are so unbelievably easy to see coming that it's a wonder why they bothered with this cliche. There's also the usual gym challenge path, which features Nimona as your rival, the various gym leaders who are very forgettable, the Elite Four, who are also very forgettable, and Miss Gita, the champion. The only notable thing I want to say about this path is the champion was a total pushover. Nimona constantly pushes you to be as good as her throughout the game and cheers you on, and that's basically the extent of this story path. Very shallow. The gym challenges are also very simple and boring, and don't have any story significance or challenge the player in any way, unlike previous gyms that made it so you had to manage your Pokemon's health throughout the entirety of the challenge. This is honestly the weakest element of the game by far. The third and final path is defeating the Titan Pokemon with Arven. Arven is the son of the professor of both games, and his story is probably the best one. Titan Pokemon are essentially massive versions of regular Pokemon because they ate some special herbs. These herbs, according to Arven, have special properties, and he wants to find these for cooking purposes initially, but he later reveals that it's to help his dying Pokemon dog Mabosstiff. It ends up bringing in a very personal motivation to follow his storyline, and once his motivation was revealed, I solely did this part of the story until completion. You end up fighting Arven in a friendly battle where he uses Mabosstiff as his final Pokemon, and he uses all of the Pokemon he gathered during your adventures together. It's a very nice story on its own, but I reckon it could have been utilised so much better. It was such missed potential to have Arven be your rival in this game, and for his Pokemon's condition to be the result of the evil team. His story could have been stretched across all aspects of this game, but sadly it was relegated to a third of this game's content. It still works on its own, and his story continues into the end game, very lazily might I add, but it's probably the only good thing that came out of this game. So essentially 2/3 of these games' content is excruciatingly underwhelming. The gym challenge story was done way better in Sword and Shield in my opinion. Previous evil teams had much higher stakes and a much larger impacts on the stories overall, and Arven's story is up there with some of the best Pokemon rival stories but didn't reach its full potential. These three story beats are a major reason why this generation of Pokemon games was extremely disappointing, next to the irrefutably massive lack of content. But the disappointments don't stop there. Terastallization is an awful mechanic, both in normal Pokemon battles and in Terra battles. The only thing Terastallization is good for is throwing off your opponent for a single turn by completely changing the weaknesses and strengths of your Pokemon's typing. It makes Pokemon battling a nightmare. Sure, it's a versatile mechanic, but it does absolutely nothing in Pokemon battles besides give other types of moves a same type attack bonus and change your Pokemon's weaknesses. This doesn't really change the fact that most teams carry some type of coverage for at least most, if not all, types. Not to mention most of the time, Pokemon can't really learn many moves outside of their base typing, and having a more defensively oriented Terra type means you lose the stab capability of most of your moves. Compared to previous battle gimmicks like Mega Evolution that made previously mid Pokemon much more interesting and viable, Terastallization just isn't all that great or exciting outside of a defensive switcheroo. Terra battles. Terra battles are the replacement for Dynamax dens, but they function so much worse. In Dynamax battles, a single turn went through each move one by one and made sure that everything was handled before moving on to the next turn. In Terra battles, there are no turns. Everyone's turns are instanced to their own Pokemon, and it is an utter nightmare to attempt to understand what is going on within the battle. Trying to heal another teammate's Pokemon is impossible, because you can't tell when the enemy Pokemon is going to attack it. And sometimes you might even miss the opportunity to heal them because you couldn't cycle your turn fast enough. Sometimes you might completely KO the Terra Pokemon, only for it to then throw up a shield and magically recover half of its health. Sometimes you might not even get an opportunity to defend yourself because the Terra Pokemon uses 3 health stage related moves on you all at once. Sometimes the battle will break and become unresponsive for 10 whole seconds because the game has to process what the hell is happening. Sometimes your team might use 3 moves just as the timer runs out, only for the Pokemon to become invincible and not die, and fail the battle even though if those moves did do damage, you'd have actually succeeded. It is an absolute disaster of a game mode. You can change your Pokemon's Terra type, but that takes forever. From max difficulty Terra raids, you might get a minimum of 1 Terra Shard, maximum 3 or 4. You need 50 Terra Shards to change the Terra type of your Pokemon. Imagine doing this for all 6 of your Pokemon. Like I did. That's 300 Terra Shards. If you're getting an average of 3 Terra Shards every 5 minutes, that would take you 8.5 hours. And this isn't even considering the fact that you might fail the battle, or if the battle takes longer than 5 minutes. It is literal torture to attempt. It is not fun at all. But this is not the only multiplayer element of the game. There is another multiplayer mode, and it is quite literally useless. The Union Circle is something that features at every Pokemon Center and allows you to connect to someone else's game so you can travel together, battle each other, and trade. That's all it does. It is useless outside of this. You can't witness your friends battling gym leaders, taking on the Pokemon League or anything. You just go out into the wild and battle stuff in each other's presence. If this gets expanded upon in later Pokemon games, great. But here, I used this gimmick once, and never again after, because it was useless. And that's about every element of these games I could cover. There's nothing to do after finishing the 3 story branches and the endgame content, besides doing online battles, and while I'm a fan of battling, I don't like many of the Pokemon that reside in the game. A lot of my favourite Pokemon are missing, and so that was a big kick in the teeth to my motivation for ever returning to these games. There's nothing bringing me back to play the game again, and I think that says all about how much effort went into making this generation of Pokemon games. Not only on a technical level are they horrendously bad, but they also lack in a variety of factors, such as gameplay variety, replayable and interesting content, engaging story, except for Arven's third of it, fun mechanics, a good multiplayer system, and an in-depth open world. The fact that the Generation 9 games lack so much of what made Pokemon such a good game franchise to begin with is precisely why Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are such disappointing entries in the series. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please share this with your friends and show it some support by giving it a like. Hit subscribe if you want to stay up to date with new video releases from me, and if you do, I'll likely see you in the next video. Laters.